boy, this one. This one, chaps, is going to be one for the ages. Hey, Douglas, word of advice for you, mate. If you're going to try your aces at being a smug, self-righteous prick, it would greatly behoove you to not dismiss your opponent as simply a comedian, especially when said comedian ends up clowning your ass for an audience of literally millions of people. It's like he went out of his way to set up a joke and pinata his own ass as the punchline. Suppose I should explain this. Recently, Douglas Murray, Englishman, journalist, author, etc., went on Joe Rogan with Libertarian comedian Dave Smith. To say that Smith ended up smoking Murray, I should probably rephrase that, would probably be the understatement of the century. Or rather that Murray smoked himself, seeing as the first 40 minutes was Murray putting his neck in a noose of his own making and then proceeded to turn into a spattering shit show. Despite his aristocratic mannerisms, he seems to have the room-reading skills of a drunken badger. For those of you who don't know this, Douglas Murray is a war-hawking psychopath and one of the most shamelessly outspoken Israeli shills in the world. His opening line, I shit you not, was to chastise Rogan, suggesting that he has not had enough pro-war guests on the podcast, with all the subtleties of a sledgehammer to your fucking tailbone. Yeah, it's not like we don't have enough people in the mainstream glazing forever wars. No, we need to hear that on alternative media as well, for some reason. Not exactly a great way to ingratiate yourself to the audience now, is it, Douglas? And the increase in the noticing is largely because of podcasts like Rogan's and so-called self-appointed experts, as he veers off into School of Schizoid territory about algorithmic manipulation and, not the fact that we live in the 21st century, have mass telecommunications, access to media, history, or the actions of those currently committing war crimes. My word, Rogan, what an irresponsible chap you are. And how dare you people express disdain at your tax dollars being used to fund a war? Why, you selfish bastards. Douglas also brought up Daryl Cooper and used him as an example of said self-appointed experts, which he has not done, by the way, complained about him saying he has tried to listen to Daryl's work. And yet he appears to not even know the guy's damn name. As the minutes continued to roll on, it became increasingly apparent he was talking out of his ass. He has never listened to any of the people he's chastising. Or if he has, not long enough to know anything false that he can personally debunk. At one point, he admits to looking them up on the way to the studio. He came off like a headline reader that barely glanced past the first paragraph. Dave was right, he was just strawmanning them, propping them up as caricatures. All the while, he was trying to gatekeep the online discourse in a desperate attempt to divert criticism away from his handlers. Basically due to an increasing subculture who's downplaying the mustache man and the actions of the Third Reich. You taking the piss? Considering the regime's psychotic obsession with the mustache man going on nearly a damn century, the idea that a couple of whimsical edgelords are somehow going to be responsible for history repeating itself makes Douglas sound like the most hysterically deranged kind of boomer imaginable. His contention for this opinion was based on this hyperbolic worst-case scenario where we all glorified the Third Reich and viewed Churchill as the villain. Shut up. It took him almost a half a damn hour to simply say, I don't like fringe ideas becoming mainstream. It strikes me as insanely stupid to go on a show, express disapproval at the people on the show for their prior guests, whilst also evidently knowing fuck all about their work. And when your ignorance on the matter gets exposed, you pathetically deflect and strawman them as but fringe weirdos whose work will not stand up to scrutiny by the people you defer to as the experts. The numerous appeals to authority were nauseating. Oh, and also, those who gravitate towards these fringe ideas are disconnected, unhappy people. That is the riches of peak irony right there, calling other people disconnected. I wonder if your defense of genocide is propelled by connections, Murray, pray tell. He's saying all of this whilst sitting across the man he's primarily accusing of promulgating these very ideas. How do you think Joe would respond to that, Douglas, really? I mean, he's always so polite, but Joe would be entirely justified to snap back and say, who the hell do you think you are morally lecturing me on behalf of experts, you piss off? Saying these ideas are debunked and can't stand up to scrutiny. Early on, when he was clearly on the ropes, clueless, out of his depth, does he ask, why are we talking about these people? With Dave amusingly shooting back, because you brought them up. Again, amusingly ironic considering he himself was flailing, couldn't make any coherent arguments that stood up to scrutiny, points of contention largely made by, himself, really. Given that Trump was pushing this clown via one of Murray's latest books after damn near everyone's been dunking on him for this dumpster fire performance, It all screams inorganic. Either he was sent there to defend the indefensible, or this is them trying to clean up the most embarrassing shitshow of Murray's career. If I was a cynical person, and I think this Taz I am not, I would damn near bet he was sent there to do PR. There's a few problems with Murray here, namely, he has no valid criticisms of the views that he finds contentious, given that he is largely ignorant of what those views even are. There's nothing more than wishing to gatekeep certain ideas because they violate some or other elements of quote-unquote historical inaccuracies as decided by the so-called experts that happen to side with Douglas's moral perceptions on the matter, fearing that people will rise under a banner powered by these so-called historical inaccuracies. But more amusingly, he seems to have no idea how the internet works. People do not like to be told what to think and do, especially in this day and age. And if your opposition to their intellectual curiosity is based on some hyperbolic exaggeration of danger and you can't even defend it personally, you defer to somebody else. The collective reaction will be, who the fuck do you think you are? Especially if you're up your own arse. He really did come across like some kind of schizoid boomer who's been led to believe my World War II narrative is on the fritz due to prolonged exposure to 4chan's pole porn. I am mind-blown that Mr. Anti-Islam himself is surprised that the right of the Western world are uniting on grounds of ethnic and racial solidarity, given that that is what's under threat. Duh, you wanker. My word, we run the risk of people realizing that just because the Third Reich valued something, it doesn't make that thing inherently morally reprehensible. On the plus side, given the massively unpopular position Murray decided to undertake, as well as failing miserably trying to defend it, well done for throwing out all the names of the people who happen to get under your skin. I'm sure your lackluster performance definitely did not get more people to go and look them up. At all, no. There's no comments whatsoever on that podcast and appearances thanking Murray for the introduction. During a conversation about Churchill, does he say, it's a very weird thing to go back, zone in on a man and say this one thing is a mistake and should characterize him, and you ignore everything else. My word, I wonder who else you could possibly apply that to. If you look at the previous century, you will see the implementation of ideologies. You might notice one ideology has a significantly higher death toll, but for some reason isn't considered the worst one. It's almost like some lives are valued more than others, for some reason. And the moment you notice this unusual disparity with any kind of inquisitive disposition, especially in conjunction with the current state of geopolitics, you get reactions like Douglas Murray here. It's almost like these reactions are spurring some questions now, isn't it? So much of what he said amounted to a contortionist stricken with cerebral palsy. Early on, they bring up the danger of taking one too many red pills, that it has the capacity to make one go schizo and look into everything after one discovers one lie pushed by the powers that be. Now, Dave says his reaction to this is that the powers that be should stop lying through their freaking teeth. A fair response, one would imagine. If you claim to be an expert, one would think being correct is kind of a prerequisite, no? Murray's stupid response is to reply, well, maybe you have power. Yeah, that's all well and good, Murray, but the supposed power of Dave does not stop the experts from sucking asshole. I hate this argument because it puts the burden of responsibility on the broadcaster as if A, they are responsible for what comes out of somebody else's mouth, and B, the reaction of the audience. He then agrees with Dave there's a collapse in credibility from the experts, citing how the origins of the Red Sniffle season came tumbling down in real time. No one needed to be experts in medicine to discuss that one, I see. However, later on, he takes issue with anyone not being a so-called expert discussing history, with the scuffle between him and Joe. I'm not an expert, but I'm talking all the time about this one thing. So what's the solution? Not talk about it? No, it's to have more experts around. So let me get this straight. Podcasters have power. You don't need to be an expert to talk about something, and the experts are often wrong. Except when it comes to your sacred cow, in which case we do need to have experts around to debunk claims from people who aren't experts, say they aren't experts, who you keep calling self-appointed experts, because reasons. Again, this is all under the first hour. As far as I'm concerned, that was the tombstone on his credibility. And boy did he prove that to be the case when it came to Ukraine. Dave made the claim that even the CIA director of 2008 wrote to Condoleezza Rice that this flirting with NATO is going to have disastrous consequences. Turns out that was true. What a shock. Not the war itself, mind you, more so the fact that the CIA was right about something, for once. To which Murray scoffs, condescendingly, I admire your appeal to authority to the head of the CIA. You regard the view of the CIA director on that occasion as being useful for your argument. No, that's bollocks. Douglas tries to obfuscate this issue with this pretentious word salad, pulling up a quote from some old culture about how we walk through life in a fog, carving a path as we stumble along, but when we look back we see the man in the path but not the fog. Everything looks inevitable in the present, and the Russian fog post the fall of the war was pretty considerable. Except that's a total crock of shit. Thankfully, Dave, much like I have as well, brought up George Kennan, designer of the Soviet containment program, who saw right through that fog during the first round of NATO expansion in the early 90s. In many ways, his prophetic warnings about Russia's inevitable use of hard power seems to have been US foreign policy. It's hard to say that Dave is the one appealing to the authority of the CIA when it suits his argument. Meanwhile, Douglas, on the other hand, calls Putin a lying dictator, but will totally believe his every word when it comes to lamenting the loss of the Soviet Union, which conveniently fits his narrative, as if that Putin is set in stone and can never change for any reason whatsoever. I think I can safely say being in power for about 2 decades definitely requires some element of flexibility. Anyone who tries to leverage lying as some greater moral sin when done by a supposed dictator simply because they reside in a liberal democracy is not someone you should ever take seriously. As if liberal democracies are somehow more honest. Give me a friggin' break. I have a tendency of disregarding anyone who dismisses the NATO perspective as a Putin talking point, especially as this issue was raised when Gorbachev was still in power. What pisses me off about all of this, though, is the arrogance of American foreign policy, and more specifically, how the concept of sovereignty only seems to matter when it suits American interests. And yes, that sounds completely cockeyed for a reason, because it is. If America or Canada were harboring Chinese weapons of war, you can bet your ass American respect for sovereignty would go out the fucking window. Cuban Missile Crisis, anyone? Oh, but these countries wanted to be in NATO. Yeah, and guess what? Russia doesn't like that, and Russia is willing to actually do something about it. It is not about some objective moral standard. It is not about what is fair. It is about the cold, hard reality of force. Might makes right, whether you like it or not. They who has the nukes, the muscle, and the willingness to flex it. That's Russia. Sargon pointed this out as well. Russia is old, and the one thing we tend to respect is its age. The word most aptly used to describe Russia is endurance. Russia survived more than 50 years of communism. It is not about to be pushed around by some trust fund baby of a nation. Yes, I said it, Yanks, come at me. Dave correctly pointed out, Putin is supposedly the enemy. We're naturally going to care more about the corruption of Ukraine, considering they're the recipients of Western money, which is bizarre because, well, Douglas was the one who brought up their corruption in the first place. Oh, but the corruption of Putin is legendary, as opposed to his adversaries, who banned opposition parties, thus suspending the wholly democratic procedure and making what, about $250 billion disappear, and Russia is still going to win. Fuck you call that, Douglas, a gifted amateur, is it? Maybe it's your contradictory bias that makes people think you're full of shit. Just rather odd he spoke so fondly about the need for experts, considering his disapproval of Professor Mearsheimer. Oh wait, that's an actual expert who isn't ideologically wedded and deals with realpolitik. And I'm under the impression Professor Mearsheimer's, openness about the influence wielded by AIPAC probably doesn't sit all too well with an outspoken Israeli shill. He would pause and says Putin didn't invade Ukraine because of NATO, and rambles some bullshit about how we in liberal democracies have a say in how our governments are run. You have to be utterly divorced from reality to say that with a straight face, and that because of that, we assume the worst things in the world come from us because we are the only ones who get to air out our grievances. An absolutely astonishing declaration, given that he spent the bulk of the bloody show thus far whinging about the need for experts, and especially when he flat out chooses to ignore the caution of experts who've been warning about the present conflict for nearly 3 damn decades. Come to think of it, America has the most schizophrenic of foreign policies. On the one hand, it's Iran must not get a nuclear weapon, all of this saber-rattling nonsense. Then on the other one, it's hey, let's antagonize the world's largest nuclear superpower in a bloody proxy war. A deranged outlook, one rivaling their current economic policy, but anyway. There was one moment in particular that damn near floored me. Dave was talking about the Euromaidan in Ukraine and comparing how America would instantly overthrow a government that was messing around in its sphere of influence, and Murray, for some godless reason, tries to juxtapose that with Qatar trying to influence American policy, saying no one's trying to overthrow Qatar. And I'm here facepalming thinking to myself, you cannot possibly be this dumb. The one involves a hostile foreign power actively financing a coup against a sitting government on your doorstep. The other is trying to peddle influence. It is not declaring a desire to overthrow the present US government. It turns out if you try and grease the people who get to declare war, they might not declare war against the people doing the greasing, you fucking imbecile. I have to wrap this up because this is legit pissing me off. There were two creme de la creme knockout shots by Dave, though, one of which involved the legitimacy of his grievances being downplayed when it comes to the Middle East, because he's never been there. Again, an absurd qualification to impose coming from someone who earlier said, we in the West get to have a say in how our governments are run. But apparently only if you're an expert and you've actually been there. Far as I'm aware, Uncle Sam doesn't give a flying monkeys if you're a journalist or a citizen. Your tax dollars are still going to fund a war and you don't get to say jack shit. I recall the Iraq war protests going on. You were still in Afghanistan for 2 bloody decades. Your democracy is about as legitimate as Murray's heterosexuality. You would think the Israeli shill of all people would understand the distinction, but no. Oh, speaking of that.
Maybe.
For sure.
They should try with the political class more if they're trying to turn us anti-Israel or something like that, because both major parties in this country will fund and unconditionally support Israel no matter what. So, I mean, I don't know.
Well,
I don't know
no
what
matter
they're...
what, but, I mean, Qatar is definitely...
Notice the body language and how quick as shit he tried to move on from that one. Shady bastard. Oh, but this moment was quality.
If you have never seen the countries in question, you've never spoken to the people in question, you've never interviewed anyone, you've never gone around, you've never seen the terrain, and so on, and you've used Wikipedia, I'm sorry, no, that's not the same thing.
Okay, well, I've not just used Wikipedia, but didn't you write a big piece when the war in Ukraine first came out, titled something like, I've been to Ukraine and they can win, they can repel the Russians? So you could go there and still get it wrong, right?
No, I was with the Ukrainian armed forces in 2022 when they were retaking territory from the Russians.
Right, the last time they had any advances,
Yeah,
right.
I said I can see how they can win, which would be advances like that, yeah.
You said if we just fund them, or if we just arm them, that they can then
they can
repel.
I said that the Ukrainian army was making great successes, which it was when I was with them in the fall of 22.
Okay, listen, there were lots of people who went to Iraq and said, we'll be greeted as liberators, and it'll be paid for in oil, and democracy will spread through the region. So, I don't know. Either take on the arguments or don't.
But yeah, it turns out your time in Ukraine flirting with the soldiers when they had a brief interlude of being on the up and up was in no way indicative of some sustainable capability of the armed forces. Who'd have thought? Why, it's almost like being that does not grant you some kind of magical powers of clairvoyancy. What a shock that is. Douglas Murray 0, Professor Mearsheimer 1,000,000. You know, Douglas, if I'm playing by your own rules here, you're not a wartime correspondent, you don't know the first thing about military strategy, evidently, and being there did not improve your credibility in either, given that you were wrong then, and you're still wrong now. So, why should anyone listen to you? Where's your expert credentials, mate? Pray tell! But the moment that went viral was, of course, this one.
Let me just, how about I say it like this, okay? And by the way, when I say it like this, I'm not claiming that disputes between nations are the same as handling dispute domestically. I'm just saying on the idea of intentionality or who wants to do this or whatever. Look, even if you had the right, let's say somebody broke onto your property and killed some of your family members and you want to go kill this guy. If he goes back to his apartment building and you know that there's women and children in that apartment building, and so your move is to blow up the building, what you would be charged with is murder in the first degree. Cold-blooded, premeditated, intentional murder. And you could sit there and tell the judge, I didn't want to kill all those people. Why would I want to kill all of those people? I just had to kill that one guy. But that's bullshit. That's not what counts. You did it intentionally. You dropped a bomb knowing that there were women and children in that building. You're taking an action knowing that these innocent people are going to die. Then that is by definition intentional. And you could sit here and talk about, and it is true, there have been documented cases of Hamas placing missiles in mosques and in schools and things like that. But when you look at the aerial footage of Gaza, that does not describe every single strike that Israel has launched. There have been tons of bombs dropped where it's simply, and we have very good reporting on this, where they've literally just have information that they believe with some degree of certainty that a couple of Hamas militants are in this building, and so they blow up the building. That is intentionally murdering innocent people. And if you're going to advocate for this war, I don't see how you can do it without saying that, like, at least bite the bullet that Madeleine Albright did when she was asked, we've played this clip on the show before, when she's point blank asked about the sanctions on Iraq and our 500,000 children, is that price acceptable? And she said, yes, we believe that price is acceptable. You're saying if you're going to support this war, you know this is the price of it, so why can't you just say, yes, that price is acceptable? Because then we could have a real conversation about why the other side is going to look at you like a monster.
Good work, Agent Smith. The money has been transferred to your account.
Because, first of all, I don't agree with any of the characterization you make.
And that attitude is precisely why you lost this debate. It's not about whether or not you agree with the characterization, it is about public perception. And given that your instant rebuttal was to immediately reject the framing and not address it head-on, a maneuver you tried to pull repeatedly throughout this train wreck, mind you, is probably why the comment section was loaded with people all saying you got your ass handed to you. The question is, why is Douglas Murray like this? I mean, aside from the obvious fiscal greasing, he also believes some genuinely deranged things, like Western civilization would collapse without the State of Israel. I think several centuries of monarchies, Christendom, not to mention a rather large volume of evictions would shatter such asinine notions into smithereens. Yes, Western civilization started in 1948, thus says some pompous pseudo-intellectual. Let me wrap this up by surmising my honest opinion of this whole event. 3 words come to mind: ideology, ideology, and ideology. Let's start with the 2 characters here. A shape-shifting libertarian comedian and a neocon shill masquerading as a journalist. Hey, if you think that interpretation was uncharitable, the line that I wanted to go with was Netanyahu's lapdog. Never say that I'm not nice, I am always the gentleman. Mostly. Anyway, next up, the pitch. Now, Joe contrasts the podcast with Piers Morgan's, laying out the opportunity for rational discourse between 2 opposing worldviews. The topics of heated contention, naturally, Ukraine and Russia, and the whole debacle over in the Middle East. Now, both ideologies are disconnected in some sense. Libertarianism because you're not dealing with a homogeneous population and a single god, and the other one is propped up by money. Considering the public actions of Zelensky, the corruption, and much like Israel, no one seems to be able to credibly justify why either of these places deserves to receive American tax dollars, never mind the fact that Israel is getting hammered in the PR war. Given all of the above, not to mention the libertarian worldview is at least ideologically coherent outside of fiscal manipulation or outright blackmail, going out of your way to defend the actions of Ukraine and Israel, seemingly completely divorced from the reality of modern communication networks, does strike me as genuinely deranged. All things considered then, the deck is considerably stacked against Murray from the get-go. This is just my opinion here. But I can't imagine many people who would sit down to watch Dave and Douglas on Rogan who wouldn't know who they are. I mean, much like most debates that draw the big numbers, they draw the numbers because people know the personalities and therefore know their positions. Basically, it just becomes a cheerleading pageantry then. Amusingly, it strikes me as rather irrational then to start the conversation by not so subtly berating the host for not having enough so-called expert voices on that just so happens to agree with your whole worldview on current affairs. Which in my point of view is a tacit admission, he isn't one. Appeals to authority are bad enough, but doing so on behalf of experts as you bash them for hemorrhaging credibility? Couple that with his stacked deck positions, incoherent perspectives, which Dave repeatedly pointed out, well done, not to mention expressing the desire for more experts you actually need to go to places you're critical of in order to have a valid opinion, all the while declaring that we in liberal democracies of the West have a say in how our governments are run. I don't have much else to say on the matter, so we'll let Douglas himself explain why he's full of shit. Cheers for watching once again. I apologize for nothing.
Have you been to the crossing points?
I really resent that form of argumentation.
When were you last there at all?
Sure. I really resent it.
You should at least do the courtesy of visiting it.
This is not an attractive invitation.
I think it's a good idea to see stuff, particularly if you spend a career talking about something.
I have the right to talk about whatever the hell I want. And no one's going to stop me or try to intimidate me. And I think that if I said to somebody else the other way around, it would be equally reprehensible.
I have a journalistic rule of trying never to talk about a country even in passing unless I've at least been there.
If I said, shut up, you have no right to criticize anything that Douglas Murray says because...
Hang on, you're talking about crossing points. And not only have you never been to a crossing point in either Egypt or in Israel, but you've never even been to the region.
Okay. It's not an exact comparison, but seriously, is that a reasonable form of argument? No. In that case, nobody can talk about anything. We might as well pack up, go home, and isolate ourselves.
If you're insisting that you're an expert of some kind, or not claiming you're an expert, but still talking about it, if you've never seen any of this going on.
I mean, there are some people who've written about there are people who've written about the Holocaust who didn't experience the Holocaust and have written about it better than people who did.
But that is a different matter from spending an awfully long amount of time talking about an issue in a region you haven't even had the courtesy to visit whilst developing all of these views about it.
This idea that the lived experience has to triumph over everything else is not always correct.
should at least know what it is, what the territory is, what the situation is in the region.
So there's an irony to this, but let's skate over the irony.